Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Today I wanted to chat about darkness. Darkness is a huge component and catalyst, really, of our spiritual journeys. And so I wanted to tap on the psychology behind experiencing trauma and darkness and really how that ties into spirituality. So let's get into it. Well, the more trauma and darkness that someone experiences in their life is just going to sling them into this landscape of trying to understand good and evil. We recognize our capacity internally to feel these negative feelings or even inflict evil actions on others or have evil actions inflicted on us. And so we start to become aware of that layer of humanity and of life and of the human experience. And so, I'm sure that there's people out there that have not had that opportunity. And so there's a different layer of life that is unseen and that is not real to them. Versus when you experience it, it's firsthand, right? And so we know with certainty about its existence. And that darkness, as I said, slinks us into this landscape of good and evil that we attempt to grapple with and we attempt to understand. And this is where this concept of spirituality ties in, is because there's in the moment psychological strategies that we know of to manage and mitigate the damage of the evil we experience, right? This would be equivalent to like trauma treatment. And then there's still fears, right, that go alongside a lot of deeper existential questions. We start to grapple with death, vulnerability, innocence, meaning. We want to make meaning in our lives. This is something that humans deeply seek. And so the more evil that you experience and the more you're trying to understand and apply meaning to it, this is what really calls and beckons for some spirituality as a resolution. As I said, there's psychological strategies to managing trauma. And managing how they impact us. The ultimate goal would be that we're not being impacted in a maladaptive way, meaning that we take on that trauma and it starts to hinder our life. It hinders our relationships. It hinders our quality of life and life satisfaction and wellness. That would be a problem, right? And so the goal is that we attempt to adapt with it. Can we change? Can we transform ourselves with that pain that we've gone through and that we've experienced? And, that is a really deep question. There's a lot of layers that go into answering that question. When we experience trauma beyond our control, this is where a spiritual solution comes in very appropriately. Spirituality from a psychology standpoint, and when you read up like psychology journals, it's really just being able to identify an unmaterialistic force or being. And so that, just on a baseline definition, that is what spirituality is from a psychological evidence searching standpoint. There's no specificity to what that spirituality is or looks like. It's just this exploration into an immaterial force or being. And what is that relationship like between it and us? That would be spirituality. So as I mentioned, when things outside of our control happen to us, this is when something outside of our control, being a solution, can be very, very helpful and supportive of our journey. So we start to explore that. And there are a lot of ideologies out in the world on what that relationship structure could look like. And depending on the depth of trauma or challenge that someone has gone through, that will directly impact a person's yearning to understand more about that relationship. As I mentioned, if you're not being thrown into the landscape of good and evil, your eyes aren't necessarily observing it. Your eyes aren't necessarily attuning to seeing it and trying to make sense of it if it's something that you haven't been subjected to. So the more that you have to grapple with that trauma or evil or challenge, the more you may yearn for solutions and answers that are connected to spirituality. And there's a few things about spirituality that are very, very helpful emotionally and mentally. I think the biggest one, first off, is that we have to grapple with our sphere of influence, and really a locus of control would be a better concept. What do we have control over? What is the action that we can take? And what is outside of our control? What are things that we can't manipulate and that we just really have to accept? And this is where the practice of prayer really comes in, is you have a action within your locus of control. Truly, our locus of control is really centered around our being. The choices we make, the perspectives we have, and the emotional and cognitive process that we have that ultimately impacts and curates our behavior in life and curates our reactions to life. That's what we have control over. And prayer is a foundational part of this, because really a lot of the times in prayer, we can start to recognize what support we're lacking or needing. There's self-reflection that comes with prayer. There's also this calling out for support from this immaterial being or force. And so you're able to recognize, okay, I can't do this alone. And there are options outside of me that can be brought into this experience, which is a very powerful mindset to have. So, and prayer can take many shapes and forms ultimately, but I see those practices within prayer as being extremely beneficial and worthwhile and helpful for our overall mental and emotional health. The other thing spirituality can do is integrate an aspect of self-accountability. Depending on what kind of ideology or structure of spirituality you choose to engage in, you're really either grounding your thoughts in spirituality into some sort of external, objective ideology, which would be like a religion, right? Example, the Bible. That's outside of us, that's objective, that was written outside of our internal subjective perception, right? And we're trying to calibrate to it. However, a lot of people these days, they want to create their own spirituality inside. And it can be very minimal in the sense that there's not a lot of exploration that goes into defining and trusting, what that immaterial force or being is. We may identify things that make sense to us, that soothe us on a personal level, and it becomes a very subjective relationship. And then when things don't happen the way we think that they should, we get confused because the immaterial force or being we've created in our own head, is different from this actual force or being that's outside of us. So it kind of like calls on this self-reflection in that aspect. Now, there's tons of other processes that come up in our search for spirituality, but this help-seeking mentality, managing locus of control, and identifying a relationship with an immaterial force or being. I feel like these are the three most important tools you could engage in your life for your mental and emotional health. And this is a never-ending process, really, right? You'll spend the rest of your life curating a lot of these ideas and concepts, but it is so worthwhile, especially if you're facing any sort of trauma or challenge in your life, or even just levels of uncertainty. It can be extremely beneficial. So I hope that in your moments of darkness, you feel that it's a calling to maybe dig a little bit deeper, search a little bit longer, be attentive to these aspects of your life that are unseen. That's definitely my prayer for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this chat about darkness, psychology, and spirituality, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.